Chapter 4. Keep the Honeyguide hungry. Enos wished she could say that her time back in the moors was relaxing. Her apartment, although a quick staple of her home, was cold and bare. She found herself constantly missing the comfort of her shared dorm with Nathan. Speaking of, out of the almost month she had spent away from him, he was yet to reach out to her. Granted, a phone worked both ways, but Enos couldn't help but feel disappointed that he hadn't at least shot her a text explaining what he was doing. Surely he still wasn't working on the reports about the mission. Deep down, she secretly hoped that he was, so at least one of them was doing something productive with their break. Instead, Enos had poured herself over research about Bonfire and his case. Slowly, the media had been leaking information from the botched mission, pictures scrawled across the news stations, even after the time had passed. She was still haunted by a picture of herself kneeling down by Melanie Knightley's body as the flames burned around her. It felt like an invasion of privacy, a moment that shouldn't have been used for journalist rhetoric. There were other shots from that day, some of Roth and the other field heroes, even some of her and Nathan walking to the Karis clinic, but none of them held the same power as the eagle mourning the dead. To busy herself, she looked back at old articles to find anything on Bonfire. She quickly found a dead end, as he was too low a threat before his grand finale. It was frustrating, knowing that there were answers just out of her reach. Without a hero's name either, there was nothing she could find. Quickly, she turned her attention to the other two who were intertwined with the mystery. Fergus's articles seemed to only lead back to his arrest. Even though she knew about the story, as she was an active participant in his capture, she still skimmed them just in case. Not finding anything out of the ordinary, she looked into his sentence being reduced. He had been volunteering at a program, COT, Conservation of Threatened Teens, that went to high-risk schools and talked about the dangers of criminal activity in the moors. Rolling her eyes, she continued to scan the praises reporters wrote as if they were all completely forgot about the damage he had caused. Fergus, who pretended to care about the moors under his fake identity of Vigor, worked alongside each typical crime ring that a true vigilante tried to disband. He was two-faced, simple as that. With the new information that Bonfire and Clyde had given, it seemed that there was a lot more to his villainy than what met the eye. Although one question was raised the further she researched him. If Fergus had the heroes in his pocket, why did he turn to street crime? A sentimentalist in Enos wanted to believe it was the hometown nostalgia. Even she had come back to the moors when she could after teaming up with the heroes, albeit not so often as she originally intended to, but it was still comforting to be back in the neighborhood that raised her. Despite this, Enos had met Fergus, and even before he became her enemy, and he wasn't someone who held the moors in highlight. It just wasn't in character for him to turn away such a power for something lesser. Quickly jotting down the name of the company he volunteered under, she moved on to the next topic of research. Charity Karis, the bandit. She was considered one of the classics where vigilantes were concerned. She was an ally to all, enemy to few. It was common knowledge that if another vigilante bit off more than they could chew, they could always count on the bandit to help them out. Whether it was a stakeout, a hand in a fight, or a patch job after one, Charity would be there. Enos had taken advantage of her kindness before. While medical matters were what she excelled in, she apparently got a degree in some type of engineering from some prestigious school outside of the moors. It made sense in hindsight with the sutures she developed. It was most likely genetic engineering, if her father's rings that she had apparently given Bonfire before her death said anything. The metal jewelry rested on the table in front of her now as she continued her search, a reminder of what she was searching for. After finding a graduating class, there wasn't much left that Enos could find on Charity Karis. The bandit, on the other hand, was like a gold mine. There were easily thousands of articles outlining all the good she had done for not only the moors, but the other districts as well. Hundreds of stories and encounters of how she used her abilities in the material track to save the day. If anyone was a true hero, it was the bandit of the moors. One that snagged Enos's attention was one of the few articles about her disappearance. For the longest time, the vigilantes of the moors had asked why no one in power batted an eye at her absence. Any story written about it was seemingly scrubbed from the internet, leaving no trace of the main question: what happened to Charity Karis? There were a few articles talking about an assumed alliance with the heroes. Unlike what the media saw with Enos as the Eagle, Charity never outright said she was working alongside the Federation. Now the few snapshots of Charity and the other heroes made sense, knowing that Bonfire was most likely right about what he said. Now, knowing that he, Charity, and Fergus were all close to one another thanks to Clyde, it was safe to assume that she had joined her friends in their alliance to the Federation. It felt wrong looking at the pictures of Charity with her black domino mask on, perched on the side of buildings with the biggest smile. Someone who was so happy to help people who shouldn't have been erased from the public. Scanning through a few more articles, some modern ones found their way into the stream. Any online search about vigilantes came with a report as to why they couldn't be trusted. It pained Enos to agree with Roth, but numbers didn't lie. More and more vigilantes were becoming reckless and malicious. It was especially hard for her to read about familiar names who had helped criminals instead of apprehending them like they used to do. Without a doubt, each recent article had some mention of Bonfire, even before his final act of rebellion at the clinic. There was an irony in seeing journalists use him as an example of corrupt vigilantes long before the Federation recognized him as a serious threat. Enos snapped her laptop shut with more force than necessary. Rubbing at her temples, she decided there was still time on her leave where she could spend researching. Now, with a little over a week left, she could get her own clues to present to Clyde and hopefully, finally, get the full story. Distantly as she began to drift to sleep on her thin mattress in her cold apartment, she wondered how Clyde even got all that information in the first place. And why. Enos, 18 and a half, was drifting in and out of sleep on the bandit's couch. Now, she hadn't wanted to come to Charity for help, much preferring her partner's patchwork. Nathan and her had an unspoken rule about injuries on the night shift. If they can't find one another, go to the next best thing. Charity insisted that she didn't mind, but some nights, a murmur in her heart said otherwise. Normally, Enos would seek out Nathan. After he got accepted to the Federation's academy a little over a year ago now, he made a point to visit the moors at Nexus as often as he could. Just to hear his presence was enough to deter some criminals, which is a lot more useful than what the Federation thought, since they rarely sent anyone out there anyway. Nexus was the first here identity seen actively working with vigilantes as well, namely the Eagle. It was a shift for the public to adjust to. A former vigilante now becomes a hero via the scholarship lottery, a full ride to the best school for all power tracks, and the opportunity to become a hero. Nathan's dream. One of the only fallbacks to Enos's everlasting support was that she was losing her nurse. Sure, she always tried to be careful on patrol, but some nights wounds were unavoidable. Like tonight, along with the usual bruises and scrapes, she couldn't prevent a pretty deep gash from a sword, of all things. It was ultimately an accident caused by a jumpy, newer vigilante who mistakenly thought Enos was a robber. Honestly, she was more bitter about the weapon choice than the actual injury itself. She was half awake when she heard someone knock at Charity's house. Deep down, she knew that awareness was key, but there was no way her body would cooperate with her now. Adrenaline was a funny thing, especially when it wore off. She heard her fellow vigilantes shuffle around the room before the telltale sound of an old door creaking on its hinges. There were muffled voices exchanged as the person entered, which Enos could have tried harder to decipher. Focusing on the only sound that really mattered, she could easily know the sound of Nathan's heart anywhere. "I'm sorry for not being able to come until now. Roth was holding us up, per usual," he told Charity, moving closer to Enos and brushing a strand of hair out of her face. She couldn't help the small smile that found its way onto her features. "It's fine, I get it," Charity said. Despite her eyes being closed, she could hear a tired smile on the other as she handed Nathan the eagle's mask. It was funny in hindsight that the only thing that was protecting Enos from revealing her identity and getting arrested was a simple gator mask. "Who on earth carries a sword on them?" Nathan asked, laughing. Charity joined him, shuffling around the room and handing him something. A mug of sorts, based on the vaguely bitter smell that only coffee carried. "Haven't you heard? Vigilantes are a weird breed," she shot back, mirth lacing her words. "I guess I wouldn't know, considering the new gig," he said. Based on what Enos could tell about his movements, he opened his arms wide, showing off his hero suit. The metal still had a sharp smell of newness, different than what most people would think. It was funny what Enos found herself realizing with her senses. "Careful, you won't want Eagle hearing you saying that. Or any other vigilante for that matter," she warned with an air of caution. It was true, though, as some of the most respected people of the moors had thought Nathan was a coward, or a traitor. No matter what reputation Enos carried, there were still those whose minds she couldn't change. After Charity spoke, she could hear the muscles in Nathan's face tug to a frown as he looked away, taking a sip of his coffee. Enos was no mind-reader like Nathan was, but it was obvious that he still felt guilty about getting out of the moors. Not many people got to accomplish that, living to see outside of the moors district. "Do you think she's lying when she says she's happy for me?" he asked, quiet enough that Enos was surprised that Charity could even hear. Enos thought about speaking, but found that any energy she might have obtained from her quick power nap was quickly zapped out of her bones. Instead, she just listened. "No, I think that Enos is very happy that you're thriving. I can't speak for her, but I'm sure she wished it was under different circumstances," she responded after some thought. "Me too," he said with a heavy sigh. Well, it wasn't a complete white lie, it wasn't exactly the full truth either. Enos knew that Nathan had looked up to the heroes when they were younger, so it was only fitting that he'd be a little excited about actually becoming one. It was his dream, and his alone, to join the Federation's academy. Enos was glad to be a bystander, nothing more. The two continued to chat about lighter things, Enos tuning them out and drifting between awareness and sleep. After what could have been hours or mere minutes, she felt arms slip under her shoulders and legs. She let out a protesting grunt, feeling the pull of her newly acquired wound under Charity's applied bandages. "Thank you," she slurred out to her ally, even though she wasn't too sure she wasn't speaking gibberish. She could hear Charity's muted laughter with Nathan's. "You're welcome. Now get some rest, Eagle," she said, going to whistle a familiar tune as she cleaned up from her medical supplies. A magnified sound rang out in her apartment, confusing her for brief moments as she spent blinking sleep from her eyes. It took longer than necessary to realize that it was her phone ringing beside her head where she laid. After a month of healing, her hearing had improved, but she still found it affected by the bomb. Enos wake, she greeted, not bothered looking at the caller ID. "Nathan Cuddy," he shot back, a smile evident in his voice. It was infectious as Enos huffed out a laugh, turning to stare up at her ceiling. Even though her apartment was freezing, the warmth of just hearing his voice was enough to warm her for a moment. "Hey, stranger, how's holding down the fort?" she asked, reaching over to turn the volume of the call down. He let out a heavy sigh, the shuffling of material as he presumably dragged a heavy hand down his face. "Where do I even start?" "That fun, huh?" she teased. He managed a huff of laughter as he shuffled around his dorm, settling his phone before speaking again. "Sorry I haven't been able to call you sooner. Roth has been keeping me pretty busy during recovery," he said, the imperceptible sound of pen scribbling down something accompanying his voice through the phone. "That's alright," she started, as if she had been waiting for her phone to ring. "I've been keeping myself busy here in the moors." "I'm hoping you don't mean as Eagle," he hesitated, as something in his voice shifted. Enos knew she was probably imagining it, but the slight strain as he asked her about her vigilante persona, but it didn't settle like she'd wished. She reasoned that he was most likely worried she'd delay her return from medical leave, re-injuring herself by running around the moors being a hero, but the darker part of her mind whispered otherwise. A thought she tried to keep buried surfaced, only for a brief moment, wondering if it was a problem with the Eagle rather than worry for Enos. At times like this, she had wished to feel the familiar presence of Nathan within her mind, sharing her thoughts and feelings like they had done when they were kids. "No, I've been healing up. I'm still preparing for my return this week. I've just been busy doing research as myself, going old school. Laptops and newspapers, the whole 9 yards. I'm glad you're going to be back soon. What were you looking into?" "Charity, Fergus, and Keegan, actually." With her response, the mood of the call shifted into something tense. Nathan didn't speak for a moment after, pausing whatever he was writing as the silence rang through the small Moore's apartment. "Why?" was all he huffed out, carefully guarded. Enos shifted into a sitting position on her bed, standing to pace to the table where her notes laid. "Did you know that Roth practically blacked out our entire mission report?" she said instead, fiddling with the silver rings that Keegan had dropped in their fight. Although she didn't trust Bonfire after everything he did, she could see Charity wearing rings like them, delicate with a winding pattern, enough to ground someone with their thrum of energy. Barely resisting the urge to slide him on, she focused back on her phone call. "That's his job," Nathan tried explaining, sounding anxious in a way that Enos hadn't heard before. Unsubtle but persistent nonetheless, she continued. "It is," she agreed, "but he redacted so much of the information it practically changed the meaning of our exchange. I'm sure he had good reason for blacking out what he did," he tried. He admitted to it, she shot back, silencing anything he had to say. As far as the public is aware, Bonfire was a vigilante that ran around the moors, gaining an ego too big for his power. To get the attention of the heroes, for recognition, he decided to bomb a hospital, Roth explained slowly, eyes trained on her hidden expression. At the bottom of the final page, Roth had signed off on any censorship, written in sharp and messy letters. A random hospital. The rest of the conversation was unheard because your comm got knocked out. That's the story. Enos might not be in the mind tract, but she could remember his words as clear as day. She wouldn't lie to herself. She had never trusted Roth even before he extended Nathan's invite to her. If it had been Roth delivering the deal instead of Nathan, she would have never joined the Federation. His excitement, his willingness to share his position with Enos was what made her say yes to Nathan. She found that she could never really say no to him. "What are you writing?" she asked to break the silence, hearing the pen scribble down something distant. It paused at his mention, Nathan not speaking for a moment. "I'm finishing up with mission reports," he replied coolly. "Still?" she questioned, bewildered. Despite her focus on the mission, it had been nearly a month since the incident in the moors. Enos might not have been a licensed hero like Nathan, but she knew that assignment reports shouldn't take that long. He didn't reply, and she could practically feel the residual presence in her mind diminish, even more than it had at the distance. It was a different type of pain. It hurt to see him pulled away from her in person, choosing the heroes over her, but their mental bond also pulling back was the final blow. It had been there since they were kids, established after they swore they'd be the heroes not just the Moors, but the other districts needed as well. "It's a lot, so I should probably go," he replied instead, words short and borderline tense. She could easily excuse it with stress that they've been under, but something akin to a gut feeling told her otherwise. It hit her suddenly, the foreign feeling that was happening between her and Nathan. She didn't trust him completely. "Okay, I'll see you soon," she uttered, failing to mask the realization. There was a moment of hesitation where neither reached to hang up, but they didn't speak either. Swallowing hard, she pressed her screen harder than necessary and tossed her phone back onto her bed with a heavy sigh. She clenched her hands into fist, feeling the warm metal ring bite into her skin. She had momentarily forgotten about it, looking at the indentions it left on her palm as she held it up to the light. As she shifted the jewelry, the light cut onto designs and engravings that she hadn't seen before. Within the ring, there was a curly writing that she hadn't noticed previously. Upon closer inspection, they seemed to be initials, assuming the creators, Charity's father. CK. Placing it back on the table, she graciously fell back onto her bed, the healing burn on her wrist sharply protesting. It was scarring over nicely in her opinion, considering it was an open flame directly pressed onto her skin for several seconds. Shaking the memory from her head, she rolled over to get comfortable once more. As she drifted into sleep once more, she couldn't tell if she was glad or disappointed that Nathan hadn't even tried to ask her about her research. Before Enos stepped inside the headquarters, she was receiving glares. Instead of them coming from her co-workers, they came from the Fiotis citizens, waving signs and shouting at anyone who entered the Federation building. The street was split into two types of people: those who were shouting at the heroes to do something about the vigilantes, and those who were fighting for the vigilantes. Head ducked, she shouldered her way into the building, not paying mind to the crescendo of shouts from both sides as she passed. In the lobby, she was met with a familiar, warm gaze of Clyde. Standing next to his cleaning cart, he looked out the window at the group of protesters with an unreadable expression. Enos could hear his muscles tense, presumably in anger, as he shook his head. She grimaced in sympathy, falling into lockstep as they both entered the elevator without a word. She noticed how he pressed the same floor from months ago, heading back to the lab where he'd taken Enos to show her the files. "I'm expecting you to give me more answers than that," she muttered, careful with what she gave away. There was no quiet hum of hidden cameras or heartbeats of prying eyes, but she'd hate for someone to find out anyway. Something told Enos that the heroes wouldn't take kindly to someone working for them betraying them, janitor or not. If Bonfire was to be believed, then they go as far as killing someone to keep them quiet, like they had done with Charity. Clyde said nothing as the doors opened to a stop. His heartbeat sped up at her words, but outwardly he kept his appearance stoic. As the doors shut with a quiet click, she heard him mumble a quiet reply. "Later," was all he said. Enos could feel her own adrenaline spike as the elevator climbed levels, reaching the floor where Roth's office was. She exited without a word, feeling Clyde's eyes on her back until the elevator shut. The walk was short enough to school her expression, knocking on the door and pushing her way in. Seated around the room were a few of the higher-ranked heroes. Some Enos didn't recognize, but others she did. Her heart beating loudly to her own ears as she met Nathan's green stare. She offered a small smile, which he surprisingly returned. Taking a seat next to him, she crossed her arms over her chest, unconsciously guarding her still tender area. Roth stood, surveying the room before speaking. "This is a prerequisite for a meeting later in the month," he declared. "Everyone in this room, along with other heroes who are currently out on assignment right now, should attend to discuss the pressing matters that are rising in the moors and making their way to Theodos." Enos raised her hand in question, feeling Nathan's presence in her mind become more apparent. Roth met her eyes for a moment before nodding. "What specifically will be discussed at this meeting?" she asked. Even though she knew the answer deep down, she needed to hear Roth say it. "The rising issue of vigilantes causing issues," he spoke, voice calm but commanding. She was sure her face showed her displeasure, but she kept her composure for now. After all, she knew something that most people in the room seemingly didn't. Roth was corrupt, and there was evidence he had paid off a former villain. After a few brief points made by some of the other heroes, like Nightshade and a miscellaneous Prism Track hero, the impromptu gathering ended with everyone getting new assignments, a small task to keep them busy throughout their week. Enos felt neutral as she was assigned to classes at the academy to teach the incoming heroes how to fight hand-to-hand. Everyone began to shuffle out of the office. She could feel a vague sensation of Nathan tugging at her mind, asking her to wait for him as he stayed behind to talk to Roth. As the door clicked shut once again, she leaned against the wall of the hallway and listened. "Do I have to worry about the Honeyguide?" Roth asked, voice on the verge of exasperation. She could hear Nathan shuffle from where he stood, heartbeat speeding up ever so slightly and a hitch appearing in his breath. His nerves were electric in her mind as he unintentionally projected them to her. "I don't think so," he replied quietly, spoken so softly she almost didn't hear. "You don't think, or you know?" Roth bit back. Enos could feel her muscles tense, ready to barge in and give the older hero a piece of her mind. She inhaled deeply, remembering that Nathan had survived the academy without her, so dealing with Roth alone wasn't something new. Nathan didn't reply, silence stretching between the two men. After a moment, Roth must have dismissed him, and he appeared in the hallway once again, looking a little worse for wear in her opinion. After a tense moment, she offered a small smile and surrender after the last interaction. "Hi, stranger," he shot back, walking slowly beside her. She snorted, leading them back to the elevator. "What was that about?" she asked, keeping her voice light as she nodded in the direction of Roth's office. Nathan almost tripped over his feet, standing an arm's length away from her as they waited for the available compartment. To anyone else, the feeling of Nathan prodding with her mind wouldn't be noticeable. It was subtle, like sifting through files. But Enos knew what it felt like, the feeling of the light pressure on the back of her head. She knew in that split second of silence he was searching for the memory, the information she obtained. "A new project Roth wanted to assign to me," he said with a racing heart. It was different when someone lied, trying to protect themselves. This speed and rhythm was one of fear, but not of a person. It was fear of being caught. To anyone else, it sounded like there wouldn't be a difference. Those in the perception track that had any sort of heightened hearing knew that there was a one large difference in the beat of the heart. When someone was lying, their heart sounded light and fast, like a hair. It runs to make up for the lie, like remorse. When someone is afraid of being caught, their heart just becomes fast, but twice as heavy. The footsteps of the hare don't compare to the pounding of a pack of coyotes. "I hope it goes well," she offers. They both knew that the other was withholding what they truly wanted to say, but neither called the other out on it. Mentally, she stormed the term "the Honeyguide" in the back of her mind, thinking of something else. Just in case, she told herself. She'll think of everything but her suspicions. Just in case. The next few days continued to bleed together as she focused on the classes she had been assigned to overlook. The students, mostly 18 years old on the verge of graduating, hadn't paid her any mind as they concentrated on their teacher. Nightshade, or as she'd now introduced herself as Meredith Calloway, voiced how impressed she was, as Enos had apparently been a hot topic of conversation. "Do you remember that first training session you sat in on? The one with Kaz Reve?" "Well, you two have become trailblazers of sorts," she told Enos in a quiet tone, letting the kids follow their instructor's directions. Pointing a dark finger at a trio of students standing by each other, she listed their names and aliases. First was a name that was vaguely familiar. Arlo Wynn was a poison track vigilante that went by the name of Viper. She'd once helped him with a suspected gang rivalry, but that was the extent of their interaction. On occasion, he glanced over in her direction, but ultimately trained his attention on the teacher. The next two were complete strangers to Enos, but Meredith explained that they were also former vigilantes. Bennett, or Griffin, of the Strength Track, and Joey of the Mind Track, alias of Variant. We're trying to get more of the younger vigilantes who enroll in the academy. We've been considering them for our trial class, and so far it's been running smoothly, the older woman said, a grin on her face. Enos tried to return the gesture, failing to push past the heavy feeling in her chest. The idea of the Federation slowly plucking vigilantes off the street to participate at the academy didn't sit well with her, despite any good intentions they might have, although she doubted that they had any. Is it common for vigilantes to work at the Valiant Federation, she asked, purposely keeping her tone light. We're trying to get more students to join us with offers like we gave you, the woman replied in a quiet tone. The students fell into two lines, preparing drills against the different power tracks. But what about outside of the academy? Older vigilantes, she clarified, sparing a glance at the nature track hero. Her face shifted imperceptibly, muscles pulling into a frown that she hid well. If Enos didn't have her senses, she's sure she would have missed the change. We've tried to work with your kind in the past. It didn't end well, Meredith concluded, eyes tracking the students as they fought. Enos pushed down the disbelieving laugh at the term your kind, like the vigilantes were the problem. While she could agree that their system in the moors wasn't perfect, the heroes had caused their fair share of damage. If Clyde and Keegan were right and trusted, they've started more issues than they care to admit. I heard a rumor a few days ago, she started, now fully turning to Meredith, that Vigor had some agreement with the Federation. Nightshade paused, looking like a deer in headlights. She clicked at herself for a moment, drawing in a deep breath before speaking again. I have no idea what you're trying to insinuate. Your heart rate just doubled, so either you're having a heart attack or you're trying to lie to me, Enos spoke in a low voice, throwing a glance at the class. Bennett had pinned a girl from the prison track, who hit a fist against the mat out of frustration. Where did you hear about that? Hissed Meredith, facade dropping suddenly. The tone shift was almost shocking, feeling like she was looking at a completely different person. Her eyes, once kind and full of something akin to care, now hard and full of flames. Enos bit down the urge to smile, to taunt like the eagle would do back in the moors. To the villains who tried to go against her, and now the heroes who were one and the same. Why don't you start from the beginning, and I'll determine what's useful and what isn't, she said, reclining in her seat. I could just go to Roth, Meredith threatened. I'm sure he'd love to hear how you're poking around at things you shouldn't be. At the mention of the top hero's name, her heartbeat snagged with unease. Her adrenaline spiked as Enos put the pieces together. You won't go to Roth, she proclaimed in confidence. You're too scared of him. The why was something Enos hadn't figured out yet, but it was an undeniable fact now. Meredith shook her head in disbelief, shoulders tense and hands clenched in a fist. Enos didn't react to the hero's tantrum, arms crossed over his chest as she waited. She listened to her muscles, ready to predict a fight if it were to break out. You get one question, she hissed to the vigilante, leaning back in her own seat. Enos smiled in victory, pondering what she should ask for. What is the cuckoo bird referring to? No, Meredith responded instantly, shifting her body to face towards the class instead of Enos. Her foot tapped at a rapid pace, jaw wound tight. You said I had one question. No, pick another, she spat out. Fine, what is the Honeyguide? And with those words, Meredith froze. Her eyes, like saucers, snapped to her direction in muted horror. Despite her confusion, she kept her expression schooled, waiting for the hero to reply. Pick one. They're right what they say about you vigilantes. You feel like you're entitled to something just because you grew up in the moors, she hissed to Enos, rubbing her temple. She wanted to reply that yes, she did feel like the world owed her something. As a child, she had to decide to put not only her life on the line, but her friends' lives at risk because the heroes couldn't do their job. Cuckoo or Honeyguide was all she said, waiting. The cuckoo bird refers to both a mission and a person, Meredith started, trying to gauge the reaction of the younger and decipher what she already knew. Enos was quietly thankful that Nightshade was a nature track hero and not mind track. She had a good poker face, which made it easy to mask the fact that she knew next to nothing about the cuckoo bird. Who? Was all she asked, earning a glare. I don't have to tell you anything. I think Roth would have plenty of fun erasing the eagle from history, she tried to threaten. Enos laughed, something humorlessly, leaning closer to the hero. Like you tried to do with Charity? Because I hate to break it to you, Nightshade, but the Moors did not forget about the bandit like you all hoped they would. If your fear of Roth is true, then I'm sure you'd agree that he wouldn't hesitate to do the same to you, she spat out with less control than she usually carried. Charity was someone many took for granted in the Moors, but now she was someone who Enos thought about all the time. There was a deeper legacy that she'd left, and Enos would make sure that she wouldn't be forgotten. I'm a hero, one of their own, Meredith scowled, eyes trained on the student still sparring. Arlo had shriveled the vines set in his direction from a student of the nature track. Enos smiled in his direction before replying to the older hero. Charity was one of their own too for a time. Did that stop them? She asked, letting the silence wrap around them. Meredith's breath hitched imperceptibly, which told Enos more than she knew. The bonfire wasn't lying, at least not about the things that mattered. Charity is one of the first vigilantes we brought into the Federation, after Keegan, Meredith stated in a whisper. Before the Federation had noticed her achievements, they were working on a team with Fergus, way before the two boys became the villains. Briefly, Enos recalled the photo that Clyde had in his office, tucked away. The old Polaroid of the split trio, younger and looking hopeful. She wondered how it all fell apart so quickly, until she remembered that the Federation was involved. Keegan had sung their praises, mainly about Charity, being the main reason why we recruited them in the first place. We trusted him greatly before we realized how involved the vigilantes he actually was. Her deal was that she would show up and help us out, give us access to her suitors, and in turn we'd help the Moors with the larger issues. The three of them were useful, until Charity had to go and ruin it all. Ruin it? Or did she deviate from your plan of domination? Enos shot back with a snarl. She could hear the rush of blood to Meredith's face, whether out of embarrassment or anger, Enos couldn't tell, and she didn't particularly care to find out. After Charity died, Meredith pushed on. She bit her tongue hard enough to draw blood and to not correct her. Charity was killed. It wasn't a freak accident that made her disappear. The two boys became less cooperative. Keegan especially became distraught, becoming more violent on missions, more disobedient. When he resigned from the Federation, Roth knew that he knew way too much and would give it up for too little. A clear picture already formed in her mind of how everything happened. Keegan begging for his friends to be united under the hero's protection with him, then seeing his mistake as the Federation slowly turned on them because they were vigilantes. Keegan, no longer a vigilante like them and was one of their kind, had to sit back and watch as Charity was erased. Enos thought about what she would do if she had to accept Nathan's erasure like that, and she didn't think she could. After Charity was dealt with, the two boys began to fray. Keegan lashed out at everyone, turning back to his original path of vigilantism, just with more information on the Federation than before, and Fergus. We all knew that letting Keegan go freely would come back to bite us in the ass, and Fergus wasn't faring much better either. All it took was pointing a loaded gun in the right direction, Meredith concluded, causing her stomach to drop. They framed Keegan for Charity's death? She hushed out in disbelief. The older hero nodded, at least having the conscience to look somewhat guilty. They told him his new mission was the operation called the Cuckoo Bird. That's what the assignment was called, and that's what we titled Keegan while he worked at the Federation. He was insane even back then. As long as Keegan ran around the moors with his inside knowledge about the Federation, he was a threat to our safety. Fergus, pissed and mourning, needed an outlet. No words that Enos could conjure would explain the feeling of hearing everything confirmed. He was supposed to kill him, but he didn't. I can't say where the mission went wrong, or if it was Fergus's or Keegan's fault, but Roth wasn't happy either way. He withheld his last paycheck, and Fergus left the Federation. I always assumed that he would have gotten to Keegan eventually, but then you came along, Meredith scowled. Despite the story, Enos couldn't help the pride that faded into her chest. Fergus Hansen, Vigor, was someone who claimed that he was always trying to help the Moors. If Meredith was right, then he truly did think he was being a hero, hunting down his friend's supposed killer. He didn't know that Keegan was actually innocent, so he turned to the crime rings to help catch him, since he now lacked the funding from the Federation. Until the Eagle came. Rubbing a hand over her face, she closed her eyes as she tried to imagine each part of the story becoming whole. Keegan dragging his two best friends to the Valiant Federation despite them being vigilantes. The heroes, using them for their skills and nothing more, discarding them once they'd posed a threat, and using them against one another. A tragic story with an even more tragic ending. 2 dead, and one that was arrested because of it. Enos couldn't find it within herself to totally forgive Fergus. He still chose his actions, consequences be damned. She had to find pity where he was concerned. Wondering what could have been different if he had turned to his fellow vigilantes instead of criminals to take down the Federation. Enos guessed they'd never know. "Did you lie to me at any point of the story?" she asked, voice calm. "No, I told you everything I knew," Meredith whispered, steady heart with a constant speed. Standing from her chair, she met the eyes of one of the vigilante students as he panted from his spar. Striking blue eyes met hers, confusion found in the crook of his brow as he was undoubtedly trying to read her mind. It wasn't like Nathan's constant pressure in her head. It was weaker and more obvious in its displacement. Mentally, she gave it a gentle shove, and the kid backed off. She gave a small nod in Joey's direction before leaving the training room, looking for the one person that could give her the full story. Brantstone Labs was one of the last places Enos wanted to be, but she pushed past the amplified whine of the metal doors, chemical smells, and bright lights. Hitting the buzzard, she waited for a voice to come over the intercom to let her inside. "You don't have access to this level," an irritating voice told her. Biting back a sigh, she opened her mouth to argue before she was interrupted. "Don't worry, Stacy, she's here with me," Kaya's voice called from behind her. Enos jumped, momentarily confused on how she didn't hear him enter the room. With a soft click, the doors to the lab unlocked, and Clyde took the lead. Instead of his usual clothes, casual for cleaning, he was wearing a white jacket, like the rest of the scientists. "I have questions that I want answers to," she immediately said when they reached Clyde's dorm. The older man sighed, taking a seat at his desk, and looked up at her with an almost sad look. "I don't know if I'll be able to explain everything," he said heavily. He leaned down, unlocking the drawer and pulling out the file again. This time he also pulled out the brooch, laying it down in front of Enos. "Fergus Hansen, Keegan Solian, and Charlie Karras," Enos listed, seeing the older man's face grow more crestfallen at each name. He opened his mouth to excuse himself from answering, but she raised a hand to cut him off. "I can tell when someone is lying to me, so I don't want you to try to spin the story. I want to know the absolute truth about what happened to these 3. Clyde paused, and he nodded, solemn. The 3 of them had always been close, and I always suspected Keegan and Charity more so. I assumed that the trio had been messing around at night like most teenagers, but I was hoping they'd skip the experimental vigilante phase. After Academy Evaluation Day, Keegan was selected to be a hero, and he found the pay to be quite nice." Enos understood. While she was hesitant to accept anything from the Federation, Nathan had convinced her to at least take some of her check and put it towards the rent of her apartment. It felt odd at first, paying for a place that she wasn't living in most of the time, but she was glad that she had done so. Enos knew why it had been such a big deal for the kids of the moors to see the money amount. While hers wasn't near what they were paying Fergus, it was still enough to shock her. The boy wasn't inherently selfish. Sure, he had his moments of questionable morals, but he never wanted others to suffer from it. When he saw how much money he would be making at the Federation, he wanted to recruit Fergus and Charity, as they were already doing the heroes' work for free. After talking them up to the heroes, the Federation relented and also signed them as official heroes. "How come no one has heard of Bonfire from when he was at the Federation?" Enos asked, frustration lacing her voice, but not targeted at Clyde. She'd never heard of him personally, but Nathan had from other heroes. In hindsight, it made sense why he had learned about the villain at the Academy, considering Bonfire was supposed to be a threat to the heroes with what he knew. At the time, he wasn't going by Bonfire. I'm not sure if he had a vigilante title from his first go, or even one from the heroes, but near the end of his career, he did have a nickname for him. "The Cuckoo Bird," Enos answered in realization, Clyde's head snapping up in surprise. He nodded slowly, retrieving the file that he had shown Enos from before her injury leave. "There's a file connected to Keegan's profile under the same name, but no matter how I've tried, I can't get my hands on it. This mission file was the closest I could get," he told her, handing over the same report with the "refer to the Cuckoo Bird" note paper clipped on top of it in Roth's recognizable handwriting. The mission was almost completely blacked out, only a few names listed at the top of the report to confirm who was on the mission. The date was after Charity's disappearance, and 2 people were blocked out, but it didn't take a genius to guess who they were. "This is the mission where everything went wrong?" she asked, scanning the black lines like they'd be able to tell her anything. Clyde nodded grimly. After the trio had worked for them for about a year, the Federation saw Charity as a threat. My running theory is because she advocated for vigilantes in the moors instead of fully backing the heroes. That's when his voice broke off into something heartbreaking. Enos could see the minuscule tears shining in his eyes as he shifted his gaze up to the ceiling lights. Then Keegan left the Federation, seeing their corruption. Enos pushed on. He gave a grateful smile to her, nodding sadly. This was when Keegan became Bonfire. For a time, he truly fought like you vigilantes, like true heroes. Anger festered over time. Each hero trying to hunt him down didn't help either. The Federation was aware that Keegan knew sensitive information, so they tried to keep tabs on him. This fueled his paranoia, and that was the final straw that pushed him into becoming the villain that he was last known to be, Clyde explained, sifting through the papers again and pulling at the Polaroid of the 3 of them. Fergus was also mourning the loss of not only Charity, but now Keegan turning into the enemy, he continued. He was always an angry person, so the heroes decided to give him someone to point that hatred towards. So Fergus was given the Cuckoo Bird assignment to supposedly avenge Charity, she concluded. Exactly. But what they don't tell you about losing someone kind is that it also makes you soft. While he was told that Keegan killed Charity, I think a part of him didn't believe it, or didn't want to. Charity and Keegan were the closest of friends, probably more, so in no one's mind did it make sense for him to kill her. Enos ran a hand through her loose blonde hair, choosing to ignore the healing burn mark on her wrist. Clyde inhaled sharply, trying to hide a sniffle. So he couldn't do it, could he? No, Fergus couldn't find it within himself to kill Keegan. Then the Federation fired him, which is why you have his last check, she concluded, motioning to the slip of paper that Clyde was now holding. I knew they were making a mistake. Fergus was always a lot tougher on himself than he was on anyone else, he sighed, almost wistfully. That's when he turned to the crime rings, so that someone would help him take down Keegan, since the heroes were no longer an option, and he couldn't bring himself to kill him, Enos said, recalling her conclusion from the conversation with Meredith. Clyde gave a humorless laugh before speaking again. It was 2 birds with 1 stone. Keegan was shunned by both heroes and vigilantes, and they gave a perfectly good excuse to arrest Vigor. Then why is he getting released? She wondered out loud. It hadn't occurred to her until now what Fergus would do since he was being released. She quickly shut down the idea of a potential team-up against the Federation. He'd been volunteering through a Federation-based program, Conservation of Threatened Teams, or COT. It's a way to scare kids in the moors from becoming criminals by basically talking up the heroes. It's pure propaganda nowadays, he summarized. Enos scoffed at the thought, remembering her research from her medical leave. I suppose it makes sense. I was talking with Nightshade at training. They're trying to get the younger vigilantes who enroll in the academy. If they can still pawn Fergus around as a reformed vigilante, it would make sense that it would be to get more of them to join the academy, she huffed out angrily. Clyde shared her sentiment, crossing his white, coated arms over his chest. Is there anything else I can do for you? He asked for a moment. Enos hummed, nodding. I still have 2 questions. Shoot. If you're just a janitor, it's a bit odd how much you know about the inner workings of the Federation and their old recruits. That lab coat isn't helping your case either, she stated, handing the papers back over. Clyde let out a small chuckle, picking up the brooch that laid on his desk. Nothing slips past you, does it? Well, they don't call me the Eagle for nothing, she shot back with a grin. The old man playfully rolled his eyes, holding up the brooch. It was carefully crafted out of a golden bronze, a simple bird silhouette that shined in the flickering light of Clyde's dorm. Wordlessly, he tossed the jewelry over to her, motioning for her to pin it to her shirt. And then everything became loud. Being on the perception track, her hearing was already exceptional. Normally, she stood in the middle of Clyde's dorm. She could hear conversations from the floor above her like they were talking right next to her. Now with the brooch pinned to her shirt, she could hear whispers from just outside the building. Each constriction of Clyde's lungs, the rush of blood through his veins, were amplified. She quickly unclipped the pin, holding it tightly in her hand. I'm sorry, I should have warned you about that, Clyde whispered, sounding guilty. Taking deep breaths, she realized something was wrong. Something was off within the room. She could no longer hear Clyde's heartbeat. In fact, she hadn't heard it since he led her into the labs. "You're wearing one of these," she panted out, running a hand over her face. In response, the janitor pulled out a thin silver chain from underneath his shirt, a charm on the end. Upon closer inspection, it was a simple side profile of a bandit wearing a bandana and a cowboy's hat. "The heroes asked me to design items that affect powers. I've given them the cuffs that can mute abilities, but they're still demanding more. I'm trying to stall them out, but I don't think they'll be patient with me for long," he explained, tucking the necklace away and out of sight. "Are you in danger?" she asked him once she regained her composure. Her ears stung slightly, like the aftermath of turning up headphones all the way. He shook his head, giving her a small smile. "They've already hurt me in ways they can't undo, and I'm too valuable to kill now. You, on the other hand, should be careful," he warned. Enos held the brooch out to him, but he refused to take it back. "Keep it. I made it with you in mind anyway. I know you said your hearing was good, but I have a feeling you'll need to listen from even further distances if you're going to keep digging." "Why are they trusting a janitor to be a scientist?" she asked. Despite it sounding rhetorical, Clyde answered with a sigh anyway. "I wasn't supposed to be either. I went to school for engineering, wanting to push the limits of genetic powers and man-made objects. The heroes went through a phase of recruiting anyone that could be used of them, powered or not. I somehow made it on that list." "Like how they did with Charity and her sutures," Enos concluded. "Exactly. But soon I pushed the boundaries of what I wanted. I became a problem to them. I knew too much to be fired, but I was causing too much trouble in the labs. To place limits, they demoted me to the cleanup crew, only calling me up to the higher levels when it was convenient for them, or when they needed something," he explained, tucking away some of the files that laid on his desk. He paused as he went to close the folder he had handed to Enos, staring at the picture of Charity, Keegan, and Fergus. "You knew them personally," she guessed. She didn't need the sound of his heartbeat to tell that she was right. "The Moors called them the jailbirds, always causing trouble," he sighed out wistfully. Hit Enos suddenly what she was seeing. A man mourning the youth. Many in the vigilante-reliant districts grieve Charity, so it's only fair that some people would miss the kinder versions of Keegan and Fergus. Clyde's sorrow felt different. He didn't look like someone wondering what the next step to be to keep the Moors safe. Which new vigilante would take over protecting the district like the others first asked after their disappearance? His sadness felt like as if looking back in time, frozen. It felt personal. "You're Charity's father." Clyde didn't say anything for a long time, simply looking down at the picture of his daughter and her friends. It made so much sense in hindsight, Enos saw it. The engineering degree, the dislike of heroes, and the motivation to look into the Valiant Federation. Clyde Burton was not a random janitor, formerly a scientist. He was the father of one of the greatest vigilantes to ever live, and he was forced to work under those who had killed her. The meeting Roth was holding was the last place Enos wanted to be. In her mind, she kept replaying what Clyde had told her, and his reaction to her slotting the puzzle together. His face, blank and distant as she excused herself from his dorm. She hadn't had the chance to see him since then, nor as she had told anyone about what she had found out. Nathan sat next to her as the other heroes filed into the room, waiting with their personal conversations. She did her best to tune them out, finding herself failing to think of anything to say to her partner. The rings and brooch weighed heavy in her pockets, feeling like physical embodiment of her guilt. Nathan was being weird, that much Enos could say confidently. Despite this, she didn't want to believe that he was doing something to harm her. He hadn't done much other than avoid her, so there was no suspicion that upheld in Enos's eyes. "Do you know what this meeting is about?" she asked, as a peace offering. Nathan startled from where he was sitting, drawn out of deep thought. "No, but it must be pretty important if almost every hero that ranks at least in the top 10 is here," he told her, nodding to a few figures sitting around the table. Enos scanned their unfamiliar faces, that she was met with a subtle glare from Nightshade, her hands wrapped in a tight fist. Out of the corner of her eye, she could see one of the decorative plants in the room shrivel slightly, an unconscious victim of the hero's rage. "I'd be surprised if it was another assignment. I was just cleared for field work yesterday," she briefly stated, rolling her wrists subconsciously. She could feel Nathan's vague projection of worry in her mind, poking around her mind to understand everything that was still healing. She knew he had registered the burn because of the residual rage that swept through her brain like a plague. Relax, I live to tell the tale, she shot through their mental connection. A small smile found its way onto his face. She couldn't help but mirror the expression, feeling ease sink into her joints. It was a relief to communicate mentally again. It felt like ages since they had took advantage of Nathan's mind track powers. Whatever response he was about to shoot back was interrupted by Roth entering the room. Even though he was dressed in civilian clothes, the stoic expression he wore was one that the villains would see from Calfaction. His hard gaze scanned the room, noting those in attendance before taking his place at the head of the table. This is a discussion that is a long time coming now, he opened, his hands spreading in front of him. The room fell silent, waiting for him to continue. Does anybody in this room know what this is about? Enos asked Nathan. He paused, gently using his ability to prod through the minds of the other heroes. No, not that I can tell. A month ago, we were assigned on a mission about the vigilante-turned-villain, Bonfire. He was responsible for the destruction of Carr's clinic in the moors, and many other crimes building up to his death. This marks the 17th vigilante in 2 months to break the law, making it a Valiant Federation issue. Ina's stomach dropped. Her eyes found Nathan's, who mirrored her confusion with a mental tug to refocus. The idea of the Federation, proven with their corruption, dealing with a few people who were actually trying to do good in the moors, was a new type of dread, because it wouldn't just be vigilantes who were the actual villains. It would be all of them. I have proposed a law to the mayor, and it was just passed this morning, Roth spoke slowly. His eyes jumped from each hero's face until it fell upon Enos. She tried to school her expression, but Roth must have picked up on her unease as his lips curled in an unperceivable smirk. We will be making an address at the Fiotis District Courthouse this morning to announce to every district that vigilantes without a Federation-issued license are to be considered criminals and should be arrested on sight. After his words, the room erupted in chaos. Some of the heroes chanted in agreement, a few in apprehension. No one verbalized outright disagreement. Not even Nathan. So that's the message you want to send? Enos asked in a low, quiet voice. You want to teach kids in every district that if they try to change the corrupt world, they'll be arrested and punished? They'll learn that what vigilantes are doing is reckless and should be stopped immediately. With the Federation, heroes are held responsible for their destruction and casualties. When was the last time a vigilante returned to the scene of their crime? There's accountability and insurance with our license for a reason. So while you all sit up here high and mighty, the people who are actually trying to make a difference are going to be looped in with the villains? She asked, absolutely flabbergasted. There's a rising issue about vigilantes becoming more violent, Nathan's voice said, causing her to snap her head over into his direction. She could hear his heart beating rapidly in his chest, an unsure drum. His eyes held the unnatural green that came with his ability, but Enos couldn't feel anything mental outside of their connection bond. She tried to get his attention through it, but his focus was firmly locked on Roth. So we should just get rid of them completely? No, Nathan said, hesitance dripping from his voice. But there does need to be something done about them. Enos bit back a disbelieving noise as she tried to wrap her head around what was happening. So what do you suggest instead? I'm afraid this isn't something up for debate, Roth interjected. The law has already been signed and passed. I only call this meeting to prepare all of you about the announcement beforehand. We'll need to show a unified front for this large change. A hero should always be on top of these things. Like you were on top of things with Keegan and Fergus? Collectively, the hearts in the room skipped a beat. The top hero's eyes did not stray from hers as she stared back in challenge. All of the hate, the anger that she had been feeling came to the surface, bubbling over like a pot on the stove. The only focus she could spare was on the few individuals' hearts, listening to their internal reaction. Meredith sped up to an impossible speed, glancing over to Roth. If Enos didn't know her fear of the man, she would assume that Nightshade was the same courageous hero that faced the worst villains. Enos could hear the shuffling of her hands beneath the table, fidgeting with nerves. Nathan's felt like it was skipping every other beat, unsure of who to choose, his mind projecting the confusion onto what the two villains had to do with their discussion. She wondered what his reaction would be if he knew the truth about the two villains. She quickly shut down the bitter thought, asking if he'd even believe her over Roth if she explained the story of Fergus, Keegan, and Charity. Although his steeled face wouldn't reveal it, Roth's pulse spiked at the names. The muscles by his brow pulled, attempting to decipher how much Enos knew and how much she was willing to put on the line. What he didn't know was that she was ready to sacrifice it all, if that's what it took to win. What do those two have to do with the new vigilante laws? Another hero asked after a moment, voice meek and unsure. What Roth was failing to tell you is that your villains didn't become villains until after spending time at the Federation, she confessed, turning to look to the speaker. The young face morphed into one of confusion, turning to another hero next to them. What are you trying to imply, Eagle? That you should be considering your own company before you start pointing fingers at who's more corrupt, she hissed out. As soon as the words left her mouth, she could feel a mental tug in the back of her mind, like a numbness that stemmed up from the base of her neck. Nathan's eyes had their classic green hue around the iris, barely illuminated by his small use of his powers. He shook his head, only barely, causing Enos to have to look away from him. She could still move and speak, but his warning was clear. Roth called the meeting to a close, letting the heroes file out. Enos stayed seated, along with Nathan. She listened to the receding whispers from the heroes about the new law, and about what Enos had meant about Fergus and Keegan being involved. Good, she thought. Let them start asking questions. That was stupid. Nathan finally spoke aloud as Roth finally left. He pinched the bridge of his nose, eyes scrunching close as he sighed. Enos scoffed, standing from her chair. More stupid than you sitting back and doing nothing? She scolded, voice raising. Nathan stood to match her, frustration seeping through his mind. That wasn't the right way to go about it. If you want the heroes to help your vigilantes, then you get on Roth's good side before you start accusing him of things, he shouted back, throwing his arms out in frustration. My vigilantes? She asked in a quiet voice, stunned. Silence wrapped around the two of them, and Enos refused to look away when Nathan could no longer hold her eyes. The words seemed to hang in between them like a physical barrier. I didn't mean that. You know I still care about them back in the moors, he said quietly, his heart rate spiking slightly. Those vigilantes raised me. I've also been at the Federation for years now. I know that some of their accusations are true. She pushed her lips into a thin line, nodding into acceptance. And how are you sure that my accusations aren't true? She asked calmly, folding her arms protectively over her chest. Carefully, she kept the full information guarded in her mind, especially tucking away any ties she had to Clyde. A few things she had let Nathan read were the vague outlines of the story about Keegan, Charity, and Fergus. So you think that Roth was playing them against each other? I don't think anything, Nathan. I know, she retorted, taking a step closer. He pushed his dark hair out of his face, tugging slightly at its roots. He huffed out a disbelieving laugh, pacing away from her. This is insane, Enos, like, actually crazy, he said, looking out the window as they towered over the Feotis district. But it's the truth, she insisted, taking a step closer to where he stood. Now that she couldn't see his face, she saw the way his shoulders tensed, like bracing for a fight. Subconsciously, she set calming emotions through their mental connection in an attempt to soothe. Even if it is, it doesn't erase the fact that vigilantes have slowly become more and more dangerous, he said, still not looking at her. Anger was immediately reignited in her chest, causing her to stalk closer. So you think that completely outlawing them is the right call? That this isn't the first step for the Federation to have total control over the Moorish? She asked incredulously. Shaking her head, she rubbed at her temples as she continued to watch one of her worst fears become reality. No, I don't, he said in half-truth. But the numbers are there. It's getting to the point where villains are going to start outnumbering the vigilantes, and eventually the heroes. There has to be a reason why, so something needs to be done about the shared variables. Vigilantism. And if the Federation was the cause, she shot back, if it was because the vigilantes were sick of the heroes, would you want the Federation to shut down too? Or is it because it doesn't affect you anymore that you're okay with this? That isn't fair, Enos, he said, finally turning away from the window to face her. It's perfectly fair, actually, she retaliated. You've taken every chance that you could to disown Nexus's history in the moors. You get to act like you're a part of the vigilantes protecting our home district when it becomes convenient for you to. For once, Nathan didn't have any comeback. His eyes trailed onto the carpeted floor, shuffling his feet subtly. Mentally, she could feel his presence and her mind pull back slightly. It was still there, but nothing like how it used to be before they went on assignment for Bonfire. Before everything seemed to change. "I don't know what you want me to say," he whispered after a few long minutes of silence. "I want you to be on my side again," she practically begged. Horrified, she could feel the familiar sting of tears in her eyes as she blinked back. "I don't know if I can be," he quietly confessed. His heartbeat was still stuttering, but it sounded more sure than it had been when he had tried to pretend that he was on her side. When it seemed like Enos wasn't going to get a response, he made his way to the door, hand hesitating on the handle. "If you go through with this, Nathan, you are betraying me and my trust. There will be no going back from this, and it will be over," she declared with a calm and steady voice. Nathan said nothing as he turned the handle and made his way out of the conference room without another word. "Citizens of the districts, it is with a heavy heart I deliver this address to you all. Not because of its contents, but for the reason it has to be made," Roth opened, standing tall at the podium in front of the Foetus courthouse. Cameras snapped with bright flashes and reporters whispered among themselves, confirming questions to ask afterwards. "It has been a concern for a long time that the Valiant Federation has been hesitant to acknowledge in fear of the public's view. Some districts have better opinions on the self-proclaimed vigilantes than others, but it's clear to everyone that this recklessness and mayhem cannot continue any longer." Enos hoped that if any of her allies in the Moors were watching, that they would be able to tell by her face as she tried to fight this, that if it was up to her, Roth would have never doubted them in the first place. She sank lower in a chair on the stage, foot tapping at a rapid pace to cover her anxiety. "The numbers don't lie. There has been an increase of vigilantes becoming dangerous to the public for multiple reasons. I do believe that most of them start with good intentions, but there has reached a point where it is no longer discernible who can be trusted and who will turn on the citizens that they once swore to protect," he continued, his heart skipping a beat as he falsified. "Eric Roth, you are the largest hypocrite to walk this earth. This is why the heroes have been working with Mayor Coulson to create new law to protect every district. From this point forward, an individual must have a license issued by the Federation to engage in these heroic activities. If a person tries to go out in a costume and partake in any form of vigilantism, they will be subjected to charges and arrest." Enos closed her eyes, wishing there was a way to go back in time to prevent this from ever happening. It takes an act of courage to go and face those with extreme abilities, and even more bravery to do so in such areas like the Moors. This in mind, it has become too much of a risk to bystanders and innocents. The Federation's license allows for responsibility, rules, and insurance that the harm, whether intentional or not, will never reach the extreme it is now. Rules are implemented for a reason, so it was only a matter of time that the Federation enforced them on all types of heroes. She would have laughed, knowing that it was killing Roth to refer to vigilantes as heroes. Her eyes trained onto the back of his head as he began to call on reporters to ask their questions. That was when she tuned everything out around her, purposely ignoring Nathan sitting on the opposite side of the stage. By the time the address ended, Enos had all but collapsed into her own bed in her dorm. The room felt cold and empty, lacking the comfort she once got from Nathan's. She scrubbed a hand over her face, trying to wake herself up from the nightmare that she was living. She thought about Charity, kind and thoughtful Charity Caris, and what she would have to say about the Federation outlawing vigilantes. Maybe she would fight it, or would she be more like Enos, becoming a spectator to the decision without any say? She tried to focus on anything other than the ricocheting voices around the headquarters. She could hear the gossip about today's decision and every hero's opinion on it. She could hear an argument between two students, one vigilante test group and the other Foetus raised. She could hear the bristles of Clyde's broom sweep against the hardwood floor of the common area, whistling the same tune that she had heard from Charity for years. She rolled over, reaching out to the pocket of her jacket, and fished out the bird brooch. The dim light in her room flected off the tanned metal, sending flashes around it. While its design was simple, it was clearly modeled after an eagle. She managed out a huff of laugh at the irony. With a steadying breath, she clipped it onto her shirt, searching for one person in particular. Enos would have loved to say that she was surprised to hear Nathan in Roth's office a few dozen floors up, but she couldn't even find it within herself to be disappointed. "Today went well," the older hero told him, shifting in his seat. She could hear Nathan sit down as well, muscles tensing as he nodded along. I think majority of the districts will understand. It's foolish to just trust anyone who claims they're helping, he agreed, an imperceptible waver in his voice. And the rest of the districts? Roth asked him. It'll be messy, he responded honestly. They'll rebel, but over time it should settle down with some enforcement. Enos mouthed the word to herself, wondering what type of enforcement would be acted out. And do we have to worry about the Honeyguide? He asked, causing Enos to perk up like a dog to a whistle. I don't think so, Nathan replied slowly, like it pained him. You don't think, or you know, Roth repeated from earlier in the week. Nathan inhaled sharply, heart quickening with nerves upon the question. I don't know, he replied, voice quiet. Roth hummed, displeased. Enos could hear some shuffling papers, then the tapping of keys on a computer. How's the file coming along? The top hero redirected. At this, Nathan's heart seemed to completely stop for a few moments. When he didn't reply, Roth cleared his throat, waiting. The Honeyguide is a work in progress. There hasn't been much to add as of late, he eventually spoke, rubbing at the skin in discomfort. I see, was all Roth said, tapping away at his computer once more. Do you want to know something interesting, Nexus? What would that be? There's a famous saying about honeyguides. When they would lead humans to beehives to share the honey, the hunters would say, keep the honeyguide hungry, as they buried the spare honeycomb. They did this to ensure that they would always be looking for food, and in turn, always leading the hunters to more hives, Roth explained. If Enos could guess, he was looking at Nathan, unwavering. That's good advice, the younger croaked out, shifting in his seat. If at that point Enos unclipped the bird brooch and tossed it onto her desk with a noisy sound. Instead, she reached over to grab her phone, just to confirm the suspicions that had begun to fester in her mind. Honeyguides are near passerine birds in the order of Picoformes in the family Indicatoriidae. Commonly, these birds will hunt down bee colonies for their honeycomb, having a strong symbiotic relationship with humans. Closing out of the website, she tried to calm her heart rate as she jumped to the worst conclusion imaginable. The last time Enos had learned about a bird file, the cuckoo bird, had been about the mission to kill Keegan, the former vigilante turned hero. If the pattern she started to construct in her head was true, it meant that the Honeyguide was not a random mission, but a file about her, Enos Wake, the Eagle, and her fate to be determined by the heroes at the Federation. And Nathan Cuddy was collecting information, writing it about her.